Hi there, Simon. Thanks so much for joining us. If you could just give us a little bit of an overview or an introduction about you, that would be great.
Yep. Hi, Helen. Thanks very much. Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, so I'm Simon Woolley. I've been sort of working in the broader sort of sales and sales management world for best part of 25 years now. Worked for a number of GRC companies, sort of in the RegTech kind of risk space through the years. And for the last couple of years, I've been working as an independent consultant, working with small, scale-up and startup GRC, cybersecurity and RegTech companies to help them understand some of the challenges that lie ahead and help them move on to the next part of their evolution in business.
Awesome, really interesting. Nice to be able to use your knowledge over the years to do something to help others now.
Indeed, yes, yeah. It's very a very versatile kind of challenge, because you never know what different organisations are going to need, and hopefully, a good few years of experience can be brought to bear there.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Cool. So I'll dive into some of the questions that we had for you. So we're just going to talk about sort of like your personal career journey and sort of the early days and how you've progressed through that to start with. So can you, thinking back a bit now, can you tell us a bit about your first role in the RegTech industry and how you kind of got started in that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because almost a bit by accident, really. I actually originally trained in financial services, although I never actually worked for a bank or anything like that. So I had a background in kind of the mechanisms of the financial world, but primarily worked for businesses that were providing technology into the retail banking space and the retail mobile phone space, really mostly around payments and tools and applications that were used in retail banks. That was great and was very successful. I did that for many years. But around 2007, 2008, when the financial crash came about, what we found was that the retail banking sector was largely decimated. And like a lot of people in that area, I found myself out of work looking for something new. Around that time, a new area was starting to emerge, but it was really kind of quite small at the time, and that was around the risk and compliance space. And at that point, I was lucky enough to be hired by RegTech, when that was a privately owned company, headquartered in Mayfair in London, a small office with just a handful of us kind of operating out there, and some other offices around the world. Very entrepreneurial organisation, slightly unique in its structure in many ways, but a great opportunity to sort of come into a fast-paced environment with some really motivated entrepreneurs and sort of to really learn that risk and compliance space very, very quickly.
Yeah, definitely a great opportunity and like something unique and different. I'm sure that was a really exciting time.
Yeah, it was unusual, because I think part of that, at that point, the concepts that were being talked about were very new. And although different customers or different parts of specifically in the financial services market, were getting to grips with risk and regulation, they were all coming at it from different levels of expertise. So you, of course, had some that were quite further advanced, but a vast majority of organizations were playing catch up. And so we had a great opportunity at that point to lead the conversation in many ways, because we were going in and talking to people for the first time ever about some of these issues that they were just starting to learn about in terms of financial crime, counter-terrorist financing, anti-money laundering, those kind of things.
Yeah, no, really interesting. Yeah, and I guess it's it now, thinking back on that, it's so big and has, like, just really boomed. It's crazy to think that was, well, really, I say only sort of like 15 years ago or so. It's yeah, come on, an incredible amount, hasn't it, really? Yeah. So were there like kind of key milestones in your career from that point sort of onwards then that you can pinpoint to really what helped you to be in the position that you are today?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, because when I kind of reflect on this, one thing I do notice has happened a couple of times, and perhaps rather unconventionally, is my career has been impacted by working for technology companies who are leading edge, and are developing quickly into market, but they've become valuable assets. They become interesting companies. So what I've seen through that time is a lot of acquisitions, a lot of mergers, a lot of occasions when I've been working for a company following a more traditional path, only to find out that that company has then been acquired by somebody else, and then the inevitable change that follows from that. But that, whilst those situations can be a little bit worrying at the time, usually it's led to something quite unique, something unusual, and something better on the other side of that process.
Yeah, really interesting that you say that, actually, because a couple of the other interviews that we've had, they've said really similar things around the acquisitions, and that, yeah, you kind of have to be one of those people that just embraces the opportunity, right? Or otherwise, yeah, it ends up being something that you resent, or you're like, oh, I don't like this change, but you kind of have to run with it, especially in an industry where it's kind of being figured out as you go along, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to add to that, you have the personal anxiety of significant change, because as with anything of this nature, you're threatened with potential redundancy and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But not only that, but you're leading a team through this process as well, and so you have to be able to, on one hand, absorb that pressure in your own mind, but also then convey to your team a brighter future and help them go through that transition as well. And hopefully, in many cases, that's worked. Some cases, perhaps less so. But yeah, the that change, when it comes, is not part of your personal plan. It was never part of your career plan. So you have to manage that and deal with that in the best way you can. But by being positive and accepting that change, I think, is the best way forward.
Yeah, definitely will make you a stronger person, stronger leader because of it, right? So, actually, absolutely embracing that change. So, well, I guess this you might well reference some of these in this next question, but like, what challenges did you face sort of early on, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so I think so certainly from when I started my career, I guess it was more usual when people talked about a job for life. So there was an expectation, I think, of people of my age group, where you would be expecting to go into a role for a longer period of time. Plus, also, if you were kind of reviewing CVs and things like that, people with a career of less than 10 years was often seen as a negative thing. So having these sort of changes sort of forced upon you made that change. Now it's more normal now that is the case. Plus, also, just from a personal experience, it wasn't just things like the financial crash. Prior to that, we had the .com. We've since had COVID and areas like that have really upset the sort of the business flow along the way. So really being able to understand, the mechanisms of the wider market along that period has been really key to that kind of process. But also then really just thinking about, the technology. It has been so fast moving that it's really imperative to keep on top of what's happening in the market, and especially as the market's got broader, those changes are getting bigger and they're getting faster in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So if I think about sort of the RegTech industry, and obviously, as we've said, the pace of change and how things have evolved, like what what would you, is there some specific things that you can kind of say, right, well, this is like these things are particular trends or things that you've noticed within the industry that's evolved from like the start? Obviously, we've kind of talked around some of those things, but there's probably a few things you might be able to pinpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously in the early part of when I started this, it was very much we were introducing processes
Mhm.
into organisations that didn't previously exist. And I know, we certainly had many conversations with senior buyers in the industry who were learning these things for the first time and learning the capabilities. So naturally, over time, those tools have become more sophisticated, they become more agile, they've integrated more significantly into business processes. Although I think there's scope for that to go a lot further, and then the impact has just become a lot broader, and that's partly driven just really because of the amount of information and the amount of oversight that people need, and then the size of the teams that are being employed by organizations. When it was just one or two people sat over a desk doing a compliance function, they could look at each other and they could talk about it. When you've got a team of, you know, potentially tens or hundreds of individuals, then the tools need to be able to cope with that kind of workload and have that oversight and power to manage those people in the interim. And obviously, you know, the integrations, the birth of sort of, you know, the AI, you know, co-pilots and tools that are going alongside these is been a, you know, massive kind of change to the industry over that period.
Yeah, it's it definitely has had to scale up, like for sure. You can't be running at that same pace and same number of people anymore with the situation, can you? So yeah, very good point. So on that, I guess in terms of like sort of trends that you see shaping the future of RegTech from 2025 and beyond, I mean, obviously, like AI and things like that are going to be here to stay, I'd imagine. But are there things like that that you could list out?
Yeah, I would probably think in broader terms within the RegTech industry, I would sort of call upon two things. So firstly, we take the idea of AI and automation as a given. You know, there's no point in me talking about that. Everyone knows where we are. It's here to stay. It's going to become developed. But I think there are two other factors that the industry needs to consider. So the first one is just the sheer number of RegTech solutions that are in the market. The explosion in different tools has become so massive. I think the last time I checked, there are something like 650 companies that claim to be in the RegTech space, with something in the region of 1,500 products. Now that makes it almost impossible for someone who's looking to buy products and services or to help them with their business challenges to really work out who's going to be right for them. So I think, you know, there's a space, there's an opportunity for contraction within the market just generally, because I think there's too many products on the market. But for those that are still competitive and still want to go out there, it's emboldened on the people in those organizations to be very clear of what value they're adding. And I think there are too many tools that look as if they do the same thing, but they're not properly explaining what the true value of their product is and really getting to the nub of why a buyer would buy that. So there's that side of things. On the other side, I think when we look at specifically around anti-money laundering, financial crime, in many ways, a lot of what we're doing today hasn't really developed over the last couple of decades. Some core principles, some core aspects of the technology haven't really changed. With AI and with automation, they've got faster and they're absorbing more data, and maybe the results that we're seeing are more accurate, but the fundamental process, when you really distill it, hasn't actually changed. And then we think about the overall impact on what we're trying to solve for. So, you know, the amount of money laundered, the amount of money, you know, lost in financial crime and fraud and so on, hasn't really shifted. We're not seeing a big shift in that. So I think over the next couple of years, there has to be more people thinking about how we change that. And I think the opportunity is, as we currently stand, is for a sea change in how we approach these sorts of problems. Now, what that is to be said. At the moment, I think we're still going to be absorbing the AI revolution, and that's going to continue over the next year to 18 months. But beyond that, then I think the industry needs to be looking ahead to making significant changes to actually start really impacting differently on the problems that they're trying to solve for.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's a lot of strength in sort of people coming together. I guess, you know, like all the sort of mergers and acquisitions that you went through, like consolidating, actually, you're bringing the best of the potential technologies and skills all together, right? It's just, obviously that's not something that happens organically. It has to have have some drive and some leadership behind it, for example, for those. So yeah, it will be really interesting to see what happens.
Yes, and I think, and I think the market's struggling to, from what I've heard from talking to some startup or some scale-up companies, they are struggling. They're having to reinvent what they're doing because they're struggling to really show an impactful difference in that market that they're trying to do. And I think that's possibly the largest problem, is that there are just too many players, and it's impossible to get your message out to the market that you might need to.
Yeah. It's well, it's not an easy game getting out there in the noise, especially with things like AI, where it's very, very easy to generate content and messages and all that kind of thing in this day and age too. So that's always a factor, I think.
Yes.
Cool. So in terms of sort of advice and things that you've learned along the way, if I asked you what advice you'd give to sort of people who are, professionals who are coming up into leadership roles within the sort of RegTech industry, like what advice could you give them based on your experience?
Yeah, so I think, generally speaking, my advice is, as you go through your career, there's a natural progression into leadership, into management roles, that you become disconnected from the roots of what you originally started doing. So many of us start off, especially in the sales world, with kind of doing the hard miles, as it were. And I think my advice is always to people is to retain part of that, and to make sure as you go through your career that you are still reconnecting with your customers at a very one-to-one level, because I think it's important for the leaders to really understand what their customers are thinking, what they're saying, how your business is really impacting on their business challenges. Not only that, within an organization, especially as organizations grow, inevitably processes and procedures start to become involved with that company. And again, I think it's important for the leaders and managers within those organizations to really understand how that's impacting the people that are working for them in their team. And so they can understand that if there are processes and procedures that are not really helping, that they can act on those and act on them quickly. And I think I've seen too many scenarios where people have become disconnected from actually what it is they're trying to achieve, and become fixated on process and not actually thinking about the business problem they're trying to solve for their customers. So that's my key piece of advice, I'd say. The other things is really just is to make sure that you keep on top of the industry and what's moving around you. And it is a vast industry, and it's a very big ask. So if that needs to be really targeted, then that's great. But really be curious and just keep an eye on what's happening around you, because it moves very quickly. And if you take your eye off the ball, the whole situation's moved on and you've missed it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely the same within marketing and things like that as well for me. And yeah, particularly then when you're doing RegTech and marketing together, it's absolutely you've got to keep your ear to the ground with all those things, with like you say, with customers, and keeping an eye on pain points and challenges and everything. Yeah, if you're not listening and not keeping up with what's happening, you can miss it and end up with your head in the clouds, don't you? So absolutely, really, really good advice there. So just on that, are there any sort of habits, skills, or mindsets that you think have been crucial to your success?
Yeah, so I think for speaking myself, I think it's really, accepting change, I think has been really key, and embracing those changes, and then really, just staying curious, and not accepting that you know it all. And hopefully people who know me will know that I'm sort of open-minded and want to listen to everything that people said. So those I think are the key things that I've had to sort of develop through my career to stay sort of relevant, as it were.
Yeah, and it's I think it constantly wanting to and being able to learn isn't it, like being like, you don't necessarily people, I mean, nothing stays the same forever anyway, but it's good to have that mindset and be wanting to constantly be learning and finding new things out. And yeah, I've always really found that that's what keeps things exciting, isn't it? And it can be challenging, but also it's an opportunity.
And also, that said, you have to find your subject matter interesting at a very genuine level, which of course, when you're talking about RegTech and compliance, can be quite dry to people that aren't in this industry. And so if you then start getting excited about a new area of compliance or new area of regulation and the technology that surrounds that, then that to someone from the outside looking in, it might seem a bit odd. But if you're not genuinely interested in what you're living every day, then it will just become hard work and a chore.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's definitely got to be a passion too. So just to end on this sort of section then, are there any resources like books or courses or particularly even mentors or people who you've found inspirational that have influenced your career path and where you've got to?
Yeah. I mean, good question. I think it falls into a couple of different categories. I mean, I think I was very lucky early on to have some very good leaders in sales that taught me a lot. I think if I think about the process of sort of sales coaching, through the years, I've inevitably done many tens of sales coaching courses through many different leaders of that. And I think the one that probably stands out and the one that I used the most was an individual called Clive Miller, who runs a company called Sales Sense. Partly, I think, because he really focused on more of the art of sales than the science. And I think there's been a shift in the last 10 years or so where people have tried to lead in a more metrics-based type approach. Whereas I think personally, sales coaching needs to be understood as a framework, because the world is messy, the world is difficult, and often it's taught as a process that if you follow the steps, you will get a guaranteed outcome, where the reality is you need to be able to work within that framework to ensure that outcome. And understanding that it's a mix of art and science is important. So that's been important. The third thing I would say is I personally really enjoy reading a lot of the journalist-led materials that are relevant in our industry. So I'm thinking of examples. I've sort of wrote some down here. So like John Sweeney, the ex-BBC journalist, Tom Burgess, Oliver Bullough, people like that who write around this topic. Chris Parry, the Royal Navy admiral, who writes on geopolitical topics, and those are very interesting. And I've also getting to kind of understand from a journalist point of view how they tackle these problems, because they're not like us always looking to sell a solution or to drive a particular narrative. They're looking for the truth. And I think understanding that and then how you apply that back to what we're doing day to day to make a living is a really great way. One I would call out at the moment is that there's a very good podcast series being produced by Strise at the moment called The Laundry. And they get some, you're familiar with that? Yeah, they get some really great guests in. I think their approach is really nice. They talk around the topics with great speakers, and they're not trying to push a particular narrative, which I think is really good.
Yeah, I do love. I'm a big fan of podcast, and yeah, they've had some really interesting topics, some really big hard hitting kind of facts and stats that you're like, oh well, I need to listen to that. Yeah, no, that's great. Good list, and yeah, journalists is definitely a good angle. I think people will probably underestimate as well how valuable those kind of news sources are too, because I think they've got a different take on it, and also they're looking at it just from a probably more to write it as an outsider's perspective and with a little bit more, I'd say, layman's terms. Obviously they're industry experts too, but it just makes you understand things in a different way, particularly someone from me who, I've not been in this industry long, so it's useful to understand and read things at a slightly different way. So
yeah. And also you need to trust your source as well. And people who have been properly trained as journalists, they will explain a story where they will talk about how they have sourced that information,
Yeah.
and allow the listener or the reader to self-validate that information should they need to. Whereas I think if we're reliant on a lot of other media sources at the moment, it's less reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of fake news.
Yes, indeed.
So just jumping around a little bit, but going back to I guess probably along the lines of things you were saying about how it's becoming so competitive in the industry, and there's so much more noise out there. Obviously, at Gungho, we try and help people break through that noise, and working with RegTechs to really find their unique market and like maximize their sort of value proposition out there. You've obviously worked with Gungho as like in the early days of your career and beyond. Would you be able to kind of give us a little bit of background on like how that's sort of impacted working, like how working with Gungho's impacted organizations that you've worked with previously, and how you kind of worked with us in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I started working with Gungho probably around 2008, early 2009, around that kind of period, when I think the company was just recent, just very new. And quite quickly, the work that Gungho did became an integral part of our process at WorldCheck and then into Thomson Reuters. And we were lucky that well, the team sort of knew the topic. They understood the type of people we were trying to talk to and the kind of challenges that we needed to get through. So we're talking to other telemarketing companies where you're doing similar kind of processes, you'd often have that barrier where they wouldn't necessarily understand the core message that you were trying to get across. It became a lot flatter, whereas Gungho were able to produce that in a much more nuanced way. We also used Gungho very heavily to target very particular jurisdictions, geographies, industries, verticals, and so on, always with great success. Certainly in the early days, I think the market was such that getting access into or getting to talk to potential buyers was enough. The barriers that we had to qualification were quite low. It was, Gungho, get us the meetings and we will take it from there, or fill a room full of people for a webinar, for a conference or a breakfast seminar or something of that nature. And that was very successful, and we did that. Once we engaged with those individuals, then it was up to the team to kind of make the most of that. And certainly there were, relationships that were born out of exactly those processes that have lasted, till today. So people who I would have met personally, visiting around Europe or wherever, who I'm still in contact with today, that would have been through that process. It was, and just the sheer numbers of clients that the WorldCheck and Thomson Reuters would have acquired through Gungho's work shouldn't be underestimated. And many of those contracts will still be live today, and would have started from a phone call, 15 years ago, just setting up a conversation.
That's really nice to hear, and like the sort of longevity and you can't underestimate the sort of value of those. Well, a human interaction and an initial meeting, right? It's especially in all the noise these days, like just picking up the phone to someone and actually being able to, actually speak to a human is quite unique now.
Yeah, I do remember visiting a global shipping company one time, based on an appointment that Gungho had set up, and describing what work we were doing with WorldCheck at the time, and the team there being, frankly blown away by what we were saying, because they saw an immediate benefit to their business. And as we were closing the meeting, or wrapping up to walk away, I do remember them saying that, they basically said to me, if they'd known about this before, they would have bought it earlier.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and it's just all about getting the message to the right people at the right time, isn't it? Really.
Yes.
And if you can't can't do that. There are so many opportunities out there, and so many people that could need your services. Just finding them,
Yes.
and that's definitely what we try to do. So just to end on one last question then. So looking back, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self at the start of your career, if you know what you knew now?
Yes, well, I think we've had a bit of a theme of what we've been talking about in terms of accepting change and things like that. And I think it's a cliche, but to not worry about the future and not to dwell on the past, I think is some advice which we can use in all aspects of our life in many ways. I think when we're starting our careers, it is black and white. What I've learned is that things move, things change, and when I think back to where I started my career, and the kinds of technology that we were using and the way we were presenting it to our customers, and what's available today are unimaginable, really. And so, going back to again the theme that that I feel that we've been talking about, being open-minded to the opportunities and not to be frightened of taking that on, I think is the very important lesson that I would give to someone today. Because we're in 25 years from now, if I started my career 25 years ago, if we're in 2050, then I can't even start to imagine what we're going to be seeing. And we were talking about AI today. What's the next thing going to be? Probably quantum computing or whatever.
Quantum, yeah. I've definitely heard a lot about that in my previous company. It's mind blowing what the world could do. But you're right. It's just you can't dwell on it. You can't be afraid of the future. You just got to embrace the change and roll with it, right? Make the best out of these situations. That's all you can do. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Simon. It was really good chatting to you today.
Indeed. Thanks, Helen.
Knowledge.